Welcome to episode 9 of Successful Demo. In each episode, we'll analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one more newly released cards. We now move on to the final data pack of the Mars cycle. It's Crimson Dust. With red dust in the air, we have a black, green, whichever you call Wayland card for you. It's Tricon. This is the card I'm most looking forward to in the new pack, and I can't wait to make many decks with it. But first, let's see why I value this card so highly. It is so efficient in terms of what it does. That's the first thing. We'll get to that in a bit. But more importantly, this is the enabler for advanceable ice that we have been looking for. All this while, they have been pushing the power level of advanceable ice, giving us the space ice in Chaos and Order and Chaos. Then there was a lull period, but then now they're bringing it back better than ever with ice like Hortum and Colossus in the recent cycles. But the problem is, even though the ice has been getting better, the advancement mechanisms haven't really been. All the while, advancement mechanisms such as shipment from Kaguya, firmware updates, or even the recent Anson Rose have all been too lackluster, and it is this reason that is this factor that has been holding back advanceable ice. But now with Tricon, things might have changed. So we move on to the mats as I promised earlier. With it costs you 1 credit and 2 clicks to play Tricon because it's a double. With basic actions, this will allow you to install an ice and advance it once. Tricon, on top of that, gives you 2 free advancements out of nowhere, no extra clicks, no extra credits, boom, 2 free advancements. And wait, that's not all, huh? Did you know that Tricon ignores install costs? No way, huh? Yeah, it's totally better than interns. So because of this, there is so much click compression going on when you play a Tricon. You get 3 advancements for the price of an extra click. It's kind of like Mushin, but way better, because it ignores install costs. Yeah. But yeah, this is the amount of savings that this gives you is so much that you compare it to a runner side card like Hyperdriver. This pretty much rivals it, right? It gives you 2 clicks instead of 3, but it gives you a savings of at least 2 credits more if you make use of the ignoring of install costs. So we'll see what kind of ice we can synergize with this card. We can only use it to install ice. So the first one that obviously comes to mind, given the 3 advancement counters, is obviously the space ice as mentioned earlier that were printed in Order and Chaos. By installing the space ice with Tricon, you can then res them for free. Orion's the exception, but you still get the 9 credit discount. So in essence, you are saving a lot of money. Those 3 advancements are suddenly worth 9 credits if you look at it that way, and all you need to pay is just a couple of clicks. Always the biggest problem with Space Ice has been the investment it takes to triple advance it, because you don't really want to res it until it's triple advance. Well, life is much easier for you right now. Another group of ice that can leverage on these advancement tokens are those that have the dual mode, so something like your Morseless or the Hortum, when they have the claws with 3 or more advancement counters on them. Tricon seems to be built specifically for these ice, because now when you install them with Tricon, their danger mode is turned on. Their parentheses are now awake, so as to speak. And that's a very huge factor, because this immensely increases the face check punishment that these ice threaten. By installing these ice with 3 advancement counters already there for them, keep in mind that unlike a card like Dedication Ceremony, these cards don't have to be res beforehand, so you retain the face check punishment. If they don't have a decoder out, you threaten something like 3 net damage, or even searching R&D for 2 cards and add to HQ. Those are 2 incredibly powerful effects, and for a very cheap res cost as well. Both of these are only 4 to res. So we note that if the runner decides to run a Tricon ice without a decoder installed, they have to be prepared for the potential for heavy face check punishment. The last class of ice I'd like to talk about, and one that we should pay a lot of attention to, are those that tax out the runner. These ice gain strength for each advancement counter on them. So the triple advancement granted by Tricon will power these ice up immediately and make them very taxing from the get-go. We're looking at the barriers, your ice wall, but well, why would you play ice wall when you can play the superior firewall? If your objective is to tax, firewall does that exactly very, very well. Firewall comes in at 5 to res but 8 strength. That's right, a paperclip will take just as many credits to break as a Chiyashi. Yeah, they're both 8 strength. Colossus deserves a very special mention here because it's a sentry, firstly, and secondly because it falls into both this taxation category in that it scales strength with advancement counters, as well as the previous category where it has 2 modes. So Colossus comes out right out of the gate able to trash resources and dole out 2 tags. This is very powerful. We note that there are no code gates currently in the card pool that fit this taxation category. So there are no code gates that scale with strength with advancement counters. This is something important to note as well. Right, so looking at Tricon again, one thing we realize is that even though it seems so good and synergistic with a lot of advanceable ice, in practice there is a very big downside that we can see right here highlighted. It only works on installs on remote servers. You cannot use Tricon to construct ice on centrals. This is actually a rather big drawback because ideally you'd like to show up centrals first, especially against the more aggressive runners. It also limits your options, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that even though it hampers your deck building and gameplay, it actually is probably really good for the meta. Because by including this card, this is encouraging you to play decks that score out normally through remotes, because most other NP decks tend to be prison decks that don't attempt to score at all, in which case they will have no use for Tricon at all, because decks that don't try to score out generally have very little need for remote ice, let alone advanced remote ice. So that's a good thing. Now, there's another thing that comes into play, and that is, how am I going to build a deck around Tricon? This is something worth thinking about. And of course, the key lies in selecting the kind of ice you want to synergize with Tricon first. In my opinion, the taxation and the face check punishment categories are the ones that are most worthy of our attention. And because Tricon enables face check punishment and late game taxation, Tricon actually gives you a very strong duo mode where early game a Tricon's super threatening before you've set up your entire rig, and late game it still maintains relevance because it sets up very high strength ice. Because of this, we want to play a dual mode scoring deck where against slower decks such as Shapers that try to build a big rig, you simply Tricon and early end the run out and rush behind it, threatening a powerful face check if they decide to run in without a guaranteed breaker. And with Caprice in your deck, you will be able to close out the game if they manage to set up their rig before you get to 7 points. Against the faster decks such as Crim or decks with a Count Siphon, you can play a slow Glacier style. Tricon enables that because it gives you high strength ice to work with and allows your remote to be very taxing in the late game. We note that advanceable ice is pretty good for the Glacier style. If you've seen Tendon decks before, they can be really annoying when those advanceable ice chalk up in strength. And there's always something to do if you have spare clicks left but don't wish to draw cards. Just keep advancing your ice and making them stronger and more powerful against the likes of aggressive runners. Even if you don't draw your ice, you can always beef up your ice by advancing them, which is always a nice plus. The big question is, if you are so reliant on Caprice Nisei to defend against account siphons, to score out your final agenda, what if the runner packs Rumor Mill? As it turns out, Wayland actually, I'd say that Wayland probably has the best answer for Rumor Mill in their card pool. It's none other than Paywall or any current of your liking plus Scorpios. This is a 2-card combo that easily wrecks Rumor Mill, and it's not that difficult to assemble because one of those cards you're already starting with. Your ID is always on in the game, unless you're playing against E-Strike, but we are talking about Rumor Mill here, and not a current. So all you need to do is to play a current of your own, or score an agenda when Rumor Mill is out, and then it'll be gone. And because Rumor Mill is on the most wanted list tier 3, we don't have to worry about the runner packing too many of those. So once we exile the first copy of Rumor Mill, our Caprices are more or less safe to go. This is a very powerful combo that is going to be the basis of this deck. So Let's zoom out and take a look at what we've discussed so far. We have Tricon. We are trying to build a deck here around Tricon. This is successful demo after all. So we begin by looking at the kinds of ice that we want to synergize with Tricon. We've identified the face check ice and we've identified the taxing ice. Now, we said that we want to use these ice in conjunction with Caprice Nisei, as this will basically guarantee our scoring mechanism. But Caprice Nisei is vulnerable to Rumor Mill, so we pack Paywall and Scorpios to defend against those pesky kitty cats. Since we're playing Scorpio's defense systems, we might as well play the card that was designed to be played in that ID, which is none other than Hunter Seeker, a very strong card that can deal with the likes of criminals as well, should they choose to go aggressive early and steal agendas. This should deter them for a bit. What else can we play? Well, let's go back to our ice and take a look. These ice that you see on the screen right now are pretty expensive. We need some good money to res them, so we inevitably have to play some big money cards. After all, we traded our ID away. We could be playing a money-based ID like Blue Sun or something like Building a Better World, but no, we're playing Scorpios, so we need to make up for that with our agendas and our burst economy. We also know that because we want to tax the runner out, we shouldn't be playing agendas like Hostile Takeover, which gives us bad publicity. So this is how I go about building my decks. You lay out a web like this where each card feeds into another logically. As you add more cards to your deck, you realize that there are more and more logical cards that go with them, like Hunter Seeker in a Scorpio's deck, and slowly but surely the deck builds itself. And finally, when you are about 40 cards in, you realize that your deck has mostly been built and you're just going to round out the numbers, patch up the number of ice, patch up your economy, maybe a couple of tech cards, and obviously your Jackson Howards, and that's your deck. So I'm not going to present the deck list, but if you follow this web of thought, you should come pretty close to it. Now, I've rambled on for way too long. Let's see this deck in action, shall we? Today our opponent is Andromeda, and even though I have a hedge fund and the run ice in hand to put on HQ, I don't really like the contour of it. I'd much rather see more ice, and I do get more ice on my mulligan. You really want ice against Andromeda so you can stifle the Temujin's ASAP. As mentioned in the PowerPoint, you want to go slow, you want to fortify your centrals first before thinking about scoring from remotes, and having too many agendas in your hand is not very good against Criminal. So I open with double Colossus, which is not most ideal, but with a hedge fund, I can safely make the play of R&D Ice, HQ Ice, hedge fund. Assuming that my opponent sets up next turn, instead of running, I will be able to get a restructure off, and then I can start rezzing these expensive ice. Although they are not very good rezzes until my opponent gets some breakers down. So we'll see what kind of setup they do here. I much rather see no, that's something I'd not rather see at all. A click one account siphon is very audacious. Really no respect for me, and I punish them by dishing out a tag. They can take 2 more if they want to siphon 3 credits, and if they don't, well, they're just gonna get an access that is not gonna be an agenda. I'm fine with that. So yeah, a very, charging right out of the gate turn 1. Something you expect more from a Gabe or maybe a Los, but yeah, and the siphon, interesting. Okay, so interesting that they tell me that they are not going to go through with the siphon. This means they are not a tag me deck, thankfully. They do clear the tag, drop a Desperado, and if I were them, I would be running R&D right now because there's very little ice that can threaten on 3 credits, but instead they run Archives. They're still going to get the credit, but they won't get free access. And Hostage goes into the bin, as well as Paperclip, which confirms that my opponent is on regular Andy, more or less. Maybe. But yeah, I could have done credit hedge fund there, but you notice that instead of playing the hedge fund, I actually placed Caprice on HQ for the obvious reason that if my opponent does have a second siphon in hand, going up to 9 credits only to go down to 4 after they siphon me is definitely not a good trade for me. I have to remember that HQ Ice is still not in the run and my opponent knows that, so this is why I chose not to play the hedge fund. And this is why I chose not to immediately play the hedge fund on my next turn either. I recognize that a siphon would be pretty dangerous. So at this point, I'm still keeping low. At this point, I'm defending against Temujin on Archives. I could have played the hedge fund there because Caprice on HQ makes it rather safe against siphon. But either way, it doesn't really matter because since they didn't run last turn, I was able to get a double hedge fund off now, and now I'm in the healthy credit zone. Now I can start thinking about setting up my remote to score agendas, although I have not drawn any agendas I want to score just yet. So the agenda suite in this deck is triple Oaktown, triple Atlas, double Global Food, taking advantage of the 18 agenda point requirement of Scorpios. As you notice, no hostile takeover because I mentioned that in the PowerPoint. Instead, we'll be trying to score 3 agendas. My opponent continues setting up the resources. They are playing a very slow game, and that's because I've locked up all 3 centrals. Temujin's out of the question, but they do have something going for them. They have a KD Jones that I cannot contest, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger. If I play Glacier style for too long, my opponent will have more than enough credits off the KD to threaten any of my centrals or my remote, to lock my remote. So those are all very awful prospects for me, so I have to be very careful about that. The big mistake my opponent's making is not running the Jackson. I feel like they definitely could be running a Jackson here, at least force it off the table so that I don't get efficient draw. As it stands, I dump a Global Food in the bin, and I'm looking to dump even more agendas right now. The first thing I'm going to do, however, is to soup up the Colossus on HQ. Put it at the 3 advancement mark because I haven't found a good piece of ice to double ice HQ just yet. So instead of finding an ender run, I'm just going to make Colossus unpalatable to run through entirely. 2 tags, Trash 1 program does nothing right now, but the most important thing is getting to snipe one of the resources. And they cannot afford to run through a Colossus for a blind access or siphon at this point. It just doesn't make mathematical sense. So that's all fine and dandy. What is my opponent's solution to a 7 strength sentry? I'm pretty sure Andy doesn't have a solution to that, but my opponent one-ups me. They know that they need to deal with the HQ Colossus, triple advance, no question. They get the Femme Fatale out with the special order and waste no time dropping it on the table right now. Alright, so we have our first program on the board and it's a Femme Fatale. Now this seems really bad for me. All those advancements and the 6 credits on Colossus gone to waste, but actually, it's not really. I'm fine with that. That's a Femme that won't be on any other server. The bigger news is, yes, I have Hunter Seeker in hand. I can Hunter Seek the heck out of the Femme Fatale and leave HQ all well and good if they do decide to steal my agendas. So that Femme is not going to stay for long. The Hunter Seeker will easily take care of it, and this is why I felt so confident advancing the Oaktown. With them on so few credits, and without a film critic on the table, this Oaktown was basically a free agenda for me. And that's mostly because my opponent gave me the scoring window. By dropping the Femme at that point, instead of holding it in hand, they had to commit the 9 credits, which meant that they didn't have the money at all to contest the firewall on my remote. So that was pretty safe. But I'm not out of the woods just yet. My opponent plays a second E-Strike, threatening to disable my ID ability. Not that it really matters against Andromeda, because they can't really recur that many things. Speaking of recurring things, I should have exiled the first Siphon they played on turn 1. I completely forgot my ability there. It's very natural to forget. My bad. Yeah, having to remember Scorpios' ability can be a pain sometimes. Anyway, I finally got some ice on HQ, so I can at least hold out for HQ for a bit more. I don't like the ability for my opponent to just run through HQ for 2 credits every time until I find a Hunter Seeker, so this will have to do for now. I also get a Macrophage on R&D in case they're running medium. Now, I debate about dropping the food in the bin. I decide to because I'm not really a fan of scoring the food right now. Because one thing my opponent can do with a loaded KD Jones is to liberate KD, drop a film critic, and then run my remote, being able to break the firewall and host the agenda on film critic. I need to, because my opponent played a hostage earlier, I have to respect the possibility of my opponent having film critic in deck. Now, my opponent gets Blue Moose out, but I get a triple advance Hortum thanks to Tricon. Tricon gets me the Hortum on the remote, and yeah, now I actually have a decent remote to score behind. My opponent hasn't found a decoder just... Oh, take that back. They found a decoder! The Inversificator has finally shown up. And it looks like they are very interested in getting some dirty laundry money. So they're going to run Archives here, the least defended server. And I'm about to shuffle my food back into my deck, but... what if I don't shuffle my food back in my deck? So I give it to them. I give them 2 agenda points. What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? There's an E-Strike in play. Well, yeah, we have paywall, don't we? And this is another reason, why currents are strong in Scorpios. Besides the rumor mill interaction, you can turn off E-Strike and Hunter Seek in the same turn. Now this isn't really relevant against Andromeda. They have no way to recur the Inversificator most likely, so it doesn't really matter. However, against Shapers or Anarchs, this combo can actually pay off big time. So being able to current followed by Hunter Seeker is a strong combo that allows you to get past E-Strike when an opponent steals your agenda. Most likely against Anarchs because Shapers usually pack some combination of Satcon and Film Critic, rendering your ID more than useless. So with my opponent's remote decoder out of the way, most Andy decks don't have much in the way of remote decoders other than Inversificator. If they're running Airbag Nail, they're in luck because I have a tempting agenda in the remote just for them. But if they don't, they're in trouble. So they do get the Film Critic on the table, but no decoder to speak of, so I'm good. Note that I don't even have to worry about my opponent's AI breaker at all if they're running Farmer Diva or maybe Merriman. These are absolutely no concern to me because Ho'em ignores AI breakers. You cannot break Ho'em with AI when there are 3 advancements. Under regular circumstances, it wouldn't be advanced, but in this game with Tricon, I have an anti-AI ice on the remote settled for me. So usually I play this, and now we are in the late game, you are usually looking to tax out the runner, and I'm going to do so to some extent with the Colossus and R&D here, but really, what I'm aiming for at this point, since I'm up against Criminal and since I sniped the Inversificator, is to win off End the Run Code Gates. With Ho'em on the remote, it's very unlikely that my opponent will be able to make any headway into my remote. All I need to do is to find a global food to win the game. Meanwhile, my opponent gets an Oaktown of R&D, which is a bit concerning. Is it time to end it here? With the over advanced Atlas, this is one very powerful aspect of this deck with so many different moving parts. Sometimes an over advanced Atlas is all you need to close out the game. I had a couple of games with this deck earlier, and in one of those games I was playing against a DLR God of War deck that tried to mill my already small deck out, but I was able to use an over advanced Atlas to fetch the winning global food, something that you can't do otherwise because there are only 2 foods in your deck, you don't always see them. Over advanced Atlases are incredible, especially in this deck where you can easily advance genders without your opponent being able to contest it. And you can see right here that this global food is easily going to get scored. My opponent has no way to get through my remote. The only thing they can do is to Hail Mary on R&D with medium. But even at this point, it's far too late. With a Macrophage placed well in advance before my opponent even found their medium, there's no way they're going to get multi-access on R&D. And it is basically impossible for them to win because they can only get 2 more accesses from here on out without multi-access, and there are no agendas in HQ. So they can only get up to 6 points at most. Maybe if they have a Mad Dash or something similar. But the odds of that are pretty low. And I'm going to be able to boost the trace of Macrophage anyway if my opponent decides to come in again. So obviously they have to let the medium go. And yep, they continue through the remote, through R&D. So yeah, back to Tricon, since this is a successful demo of Tricon after all. Giving me the assurance in mind to push those agendas through. First the over advanced Atlas and now the double advanced food. This is something that is very hard to do otherwise without Tricon compressing those clicks. I would have given my opponent 1 free turn during which they could have easily gotten a few more agendas of R&D or something. Or even found the Airbag Nail. Airbag Nail was something I never really considered. Airbag Nail and Inside Job actually are 2 cards that can get past my remote. Thankfully, I didn't have to deal with either of them. But yes, if my opponent had an Airbag Nail installed there, the game would have been very different. Thankfully, they found nothing, and I closed out the game with the winning food. So what did we see from Tricon this game? Well, our opponent was way too afraid of the triple advanced unknown ice to even touch my remote server. I just jammed and openly advanced the Atlas and the food in the server and they didn't even bother running it. Not because they were dumb, but because they knew of the consequences, the dire consequences that they could have met should they have decided to take the run, possibly game ending. Without a decoder, they will be subject to the parenthesis of Nautilus or Ho'em. They wouldn't know. Could be a 7-strength Colossus. Even with Fam out, that takes all their money to break. Instead of taking those risks, they instead chose to go for centrals, which was the right call. So as you can see, just the deterrence provided by the triple advanced ice is more than enough to scare your opponents off, thereby conserving your resources. If they're not running on that server, you don't have to worry about having money to rest those ice. So yeah, that was pretty good. To sidetrack a bit, if you rewind to 90 minutes 45 seconds thereabouts, you'll notice that when my opponent made the laundry run on archives and inadvertently stole a food, you notice that I did not rest the archives ice. It was a pop-up window, but I still chose not to rest it, even though it cost me 0 credits, even though I'll gain money from it. Why do you think I did that? A very subtle play there. I'm sure most of you may have figured it out. Pause the video, go rewind it if you want to look. I'm going to tell you the answer right now. Yep, it's because my opponent had Inversificator out. Because of that nasty program, you never want to res code gates when Inversificator is out, unless your board state is set up such that swapping ice doesn't matter. In my case, the pop-up could have easily been swapped for a very key HQ or remote ice and completely thwarted my plans. So there was no question there. I mean, if they swapped it for the 3 advanced hot on the remote, that would have been a disaster. So yeah, this is a very important trick to combating Inversificator. You need to conserve your code gates, and sometimes not resing them is the right thing to do, even if it might be something that they are relying on, DNA Tracker or Fairchild. Sometimes it might just be better to rely on your other ice. Simple as that. Yeah, and because the Inversificator was out, my opponent gave me the golden opportunity to not sack the Jackson and lead them into the death trap. The Hunter Seeker seeked its victim. Hope you enjoyed this video. It was a blast making it. In the meantime, thanks for watching and happy net running. I'll see y'all next episode.